Ironside will not be seen tonight, so we may bring you the following special program.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. Welcome back, everybody. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. We deviate from comic books tonight to have an old radio buddy of mine. We worked together off and on over the last few years and many years. My good friend, a sports reporter, a novelist, and an author. I don't know if you call it a novel because it's nonfiction, but a dear friend of mine from my days at the Score and WBBM. Welcome, George Ofman, to Word Balloon.
My pleasure, Johnny. It's been a long time. But I was trying to think, were you an original at the Score or pretty close?
4 months in. Freddie Huebner and I. I think Jerry Rouse, Fred Huebner and I, and Will McCool, I want to say. I think we all kind of came in.
Will McCool is demented, by the way. He's just absolutely, I get stuff on Facebook. He's demented.
He had to be to work with Mike Murphy all that time, man, and understand Murph and get the best out of Murph. So yeah, absolutely. Yes, George. I want to go way back, and you'll forgive me, but a couple of my friends who are, I swear to you, George, they love you. And actually, you met one of them when we were working together at WBBM a couple of years ago. My friend Gary Price really wanted us to talk about Sports Phone. Was that your first reporting gig here in the city?
It was. You mean this?
Stand by, zooming in. Wow, there it is. 9361313. Absolutely, man.
It just so happens it's on my desk. Yes, it was my first gig here when I left college at SIU. I tried to get some television sports jobs. Unfortunately, they all thought I had a great face for radio. And suddenly, here is Sports Phone, which began in November of 1977. And I began on Christmas Eve of that year with Fred Huebner. And that group included Fred, Ron Gleason, who hired me 3 times, then got rid of me, Pat Binkowski, the late Les Grobstein, the legendary, and that's true to call him the legendary Les Grobstein. And it was quite something. I mean, suddenly here we are, not only doing these updates by the telephone. Does everybody know what a telephone is?
Yeah, exactly.
Anyhow, we were doing those, and we were able to cover games. And yes, that's where it started. Until I started freelancing, and decided there was a game, a White Sox game on a Saturday night, and I got bored, and I left. And Claudel Washington hit 3 homers, and on Monday, the boss, Dick Gonski, who was once the voice of the Chicago Bulls, said, I think it's time for you to leave. And I said, I think you're right.
Wow. So that wasn't sport. Was that sport? That was a Sports Phone, though.
Oh, yeah, that was Sports Phone. I left.
Wow.
I was freelancing. I made a career out of that.
So Dick Gonski, what was the name of his company? Because I know there was Sports Phone in New York as well.
Well, it was, what was the name of it? It wasn't his company. No. He was in charge of it. It started in New York and expanded to Chicago. I forgot the name of the company. I'm sure I'll probably remember as we go along. Okay. But, all Dick did was he would come in, put his feet on the desk, smoke some cigars, and leave. And I'm thinking to myself, what the hell did I get myself into? And there are 3 televisions, and Les is watching sports on one, and he's watching the Three Stooges on the other 2, and ordering Gino's Pizza every day. It was nuts.
George, do you remember how much was it per call for people to call in Was it 50 cents? Was it a
Yeah,
quarter?
I don't recall what it was, but you had to pay for the call. So people were spending money. And the former general manager of the White Sox, Rick Hahn, tells the story to me. He said, "You know what, George? You cost me a lot of money." He was a kid, like a 10-year-old kid. He was calling all the time. It was always very funny to hear that story, by the way, that, he spent a lot of his parents' money calling sports phone. A lot of people did that. But, I mean, geez, how many years ago? It's 1978. So that's a few years ago.
Absolutely, man. But it was, and really prior to, what we dealt with sports all day and everything.
Well,
that was huge.
Let me interrupt you for a minute. What Sports Phone did was spawn a lot of talent, not only here but in New York. Forgive me, I'm not going to remember everybody besides the people I just mentioned. But Jeff Joniak, Lou Canellis, the late Dave Wills, I think Peggy Kaczynski might have been there for a short time, Chris Bowden, you name it, they were there. In New York, excuse me, they had a fellow named John Martin who was recently retired as the executive producer of ESPN Radio, and Gary Cohn, who I became good friends with, and he, I would come to be with him in New York when I was coming to visit, and he told me his goal in life was to be the voice of the New York Mets, which he's been for the last 40 years.
Outstanding. Yeah. You'll forgive me, George, because first I want to show there's an amazing podcast that George hosted for several years. And there's my word balloon logo next to it. Tell me a story I don't know. And George, thankfully, has gone on to transcribe many of these in his book that came out in the fall, Tell Me a Story I Don't Know, Conversations with Chicago Sports Legends. George, how many seasons of Tell Me a Story I Don't Know?
We did 3. I knew it wasn't going to last much more than that. And the problem was I ran out of guests. Actually, the more I think of it, I could have gotten a few more, but I think it might have been maybe another season's worth because it was storytelling by top sports personalities with connections to Chicago. So that kind of limited the scope. And there were a lot of people that I wanted to have on. Steve Kerr, of course, a hero with the Chicago Bulls, this Golden State Warriors coach, Doc Rivers, who just became the coach of the Milwaukee Bucks, who was a tremendous star here in high school. Now, there were a lot of people, but in the end, the last 2 episodes with a guest was the guest that I wanted the most, and that was Brent Musburger, whom I grew up with, not so much idolizing, but he was an inspiration to my career to watch him on television and to say, I want to be you. Okay? Nobody can be Brent Musburger. But when I interviewed him, I told him that story. I said, because of you, I've done this for 50 years. And he was very complimentary, and it was wonderful. He's 84 years old now. So, I had a lot of guests, and sometime in March of 2022, I wasn't halfway through, I came up with the idea of trying to write a book. And so Triumph Books said yes in June of 2022 and said, you know what, we'll have a contract for you in a week. A week became November. That's when the contract came. And in the meantime, I started writing, and the book came out this last November, and it's been selling well. And it's a wonderful book. And I'll tell you what, if you're a sports fan, you want to get it. The cost is Mad Magazine. It's cheap. It's just
it is cheap.
Yeah, it's Alfred E. Newman is saying, buy the book. But if you're not a sports fan, but you know someone who is, a relative, a friend, whatever, it's a great gift. It's a wonderful gift. And it's 50 vignettes, 50 different guests that I had that I write around. And you can see some of them on there, and they were just absolutely wonderful. I did almost 100 interviews. There was never a dud because, Johnny, like I'm doing now, when you ask somebody about their career, they talk like me.
George, I've been badgering you, and I'm only going to say it once. I might say it more than once in this podcast. I understand you not wanting to repeat yourself with some of these guests. I think you can, because even though you say, tell me a story I don't know, and certainly in every interview you did, they give you a bunch of stories. There's always more. This is something I've learned with Word Balloon, especially the writers and the artists that I talk to. They're always making new stuff. So there are new stories and stuff. And again, you've got this great Hall of Fame list. For people who are listening rather than watching, there's a forward by Mike Greenberg of ESPN, who we worked with for many years. But really, here I'm going to go through just who's on the cover. Joe Madden, Ozzie Guillen, Paul Sullivan, Jason Benetti, Dan Hampton, Ron Rivera, Adam
Ameed.
Adam
Ameed is the voice of the Chicago Bulls.
Shame on me. All right, there you go. Shows I'm not paying attention to sports like I used to. Cassidy Hubbard, Stacey King.
Cassidy Hubbard was with ESPN, and she grew up here in Chicago.
Yes.
In the suburban area, yeah.
Yeah, Evanston girl, I want to say.
Yes.
Stacey King, Sarah Kenton. No, Kostek.
No, that's Sarah Kustok.
Excuse me.
Sarah Kustok was the first female analyst for an NBA team, the Brooklyn Nets, and she is still doing that and college basketball. But she was here at Comcast, and people who remember who watched her, she was a tremendous talent, but she was also better known before that as a star basketball player for DePaul.
There you go. Wow. Did she play for Joey? No, Joey didn't teach coach female.
Joey had the men. She played for Doug Bruno, who, by the way, I interviewed for this podcast. Doug has been coaching. Oh, my gosh, he's still coaching. He's been coaching that team for over 40 years.
Outstanding. Dan Bernstein, our dear friend from The Score, Chris Chelios, Mike Wilbon, and more. And the and more, George, I don't know how many others that aren't in the book, but I would imagine 3 seasons. You could probably write 2 or 3 more books, right?
I wish we could have written one more because there was probably another close to 50 guests. But I mean, wonderful people who wrote the blurbs in the back of the book, including Bob Costas and Pappy Mike North. They were all, and Greeny. It's too bad. There's a picture of you, me, Greeny, and Gleason. I have it somewhere. I'm sorry.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah,
it's not in the book.
No. He
okay.
It's before he left town here to ESPN, where he's been now for the last 28 years. Mike Greenberg was hired at the same day I was, 5 days before the Score went on the air. It was my birthday, December 28th. And look, serious, I've said this before. The only difference between Greeny and I today are the zeros at the back of our check. Otherwise, we're the same.
George,
it's a cheap line. I get away with it all the time.
No, and I'm another radio lifer. And listen, we did fine. And truly, I'm sorry in your case that you didn't. You certainly had a great platform at The Score, at BBM, at MAQ that immediately come to mind. And I wish that you did have more. I mean, other good friends of ours that have gotten national recognition, our buddy Jesse Rogers, who is the top baseball analyst at ESPN, and our dear friend Judd Surratt, who is the voice of the Boston Bruins. So yeah, man, that's awesome. And again, wonderful stuff. But we got nothing. We did good, Georgie, and you certainly did good. You got a couple decades on me, but no, man. Hey, I think you made your mark, and you're a Chicago institution.
No, I think I belong in an institution after doing all these. But no, I'm just kidding. We did. And there were a lot of bumps in the road to doing this. There was the Webbio situation with Mike, and look what happened to the people who were there. Look what happened to Jesse. Look what happened to Jonathan Hood. Look what happened to Fred. All these people went on to have wonderful careers. Yeah. Look, it's a different medium than what people might be used to today. Radio is dying in certain areas. It's not dying in sports radio. That's the nature of the business, just like newspapers and what have you. But no, I've had a wonderful career. I'm not done yet. I'm a free agent. I'm a free agent at age 70. And as most people can tell if they're watching this, I don't look a day over 69 and a half.
You look great, George. Don't kid yourself. Absolutely. No, but honestly, George, I know you can still do it. You got the ability. And hey, man, it's show business, and show business is a crapshoot. And talent alone is not going to get you the big job. It is the right place at the right time. I have to ask in terms of right place, because I've always thought of you as a Chicago guy. Did you spend any time in Toronto?
No, I didn't spend time in Toronto, but I almost took a job there right before the score. I mean, I was working as a freelance, and one of my clients was then CJCL, which is the Fan 590, and its host for gosh 40 years, Bob McCown. Is great. And so this is 1991. It is November, and they have asked me to audition to replace one of the hosts who is going to become the assistant general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's a well-known guy. Well, I said, sure. So I went up there, and it was during Grey Cup week. For people who don't know what Grey Cup is the Canadian football, excuse me, the Canadian football Super Bowl. Now, do I know the Grey Cup? No, I wear one when I play sports, but I don't know the Grey Cup. Geez, I have no idea. But I managed to get through it and had a wonderful week. And my wife, then she was then my fiance, Betsy, came up and they offered me the job to be his replacement, to be a co-host with Bob. We started looking at property, and Toronto's a pretty expensive city. It's also a beautiful city.
Yeah.
And in the end, I just said, I'm going to take a chance, and I'm going to say no, and I'm going to hope that I get hired by the Score. Nobody had contacted me. Nobody contacted me until the middle of December. I took a shot, and the shot worked out. I don't know what would have happened if I would have taken that job in Toronto, how long I would have lasted. In a marketplace, I really didn't know. I'm a Chicago guy. I know Chicago. I was flattered to have such a wonderful offer in a beautiful city, but I'm not a Canadian and I'm not a Torontonian. I'm a Chicago guy.
Well, I'm glad you stayed. And George, you and I represent the two ends of the spectrum when it comes to being a sports update guy. You are the best, in my opinion. I am the worst. I was the worst sports update guy.
Did you really do it?
When I sidekickedfor Buffon, Doug Buffon and Norm Van Leer, Ron's like, and you'll do the updates. And I was I was horrible. I was horrible. Well, it was before it was the early morning when you're waking up and getting ready to go and stuff. I was horrible. I was absolutely horrible.
I think back then I was just going to bed. Those were my younger days. Thank you very much. Wow.
Well, and really, George, I mean, all right, I was at the Score just under 10 years. Started in spring of 92, left in 2001, went to Sporting News Radio. How many years were you at the Score proper?
I was there for 17 years. Believe it or not, in March, I will have been gone 15 years, and people still recognize me from there than from WBBM. It's really stunning. I was 10 years at WBBM. And there was a spot in between where I was at WGN, where I was just with a friend of mine, and we were talking about the Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Finals in Philadelphia when the Blackhawks won with Patrick Kane's mystery goal, and I was sent there to cover it. Can you imagine what luck that is, to be part of the broadcast team, to be waiting in the hallway? If the Blackhawks win, I'm on their bench, which I was 30 seconds later, and eventually watching a Stanley Cup go right by my head. It was unbelievable. I was in the right place at the right time a lot of times.
That's outstanding, man. That's fantastic. Now, we mentioned Webio. Were you part of Webio?
Oh, of course I was. Yeah.
All right, you'll forgive me, George, because I wasn't listening, and mostly through because Mike and I were kind of not getting along at that time. So really, Jesse was that's all right. We've patched things up. Mike and I are fine now. But Jesse and I would stay in contact, and he would tell me things about how the place operated. And it was an online sports radio streamer, for a lack of better word.
It was ahead of its time. It was an idea that they did an online all sports radio that it was off by 6 o'clock in the evening, and they recruited some heavyweight talent like Chet Kopic, and the boxer. What was his name?
Boom Boom Mancini, Ray Boom Boom Mancini.
I mean, the fact that he couldn't speak English was one thing. The fact he knew nothing about anything was another. But listen, what happened at the Score already at that time was the elimination of the sports anchor. That was already happening because of this device. That's why that was happening. Okay, so the phone was it. Fred was the first to go. I said, you know what? Before they get me, this is a chance of maybe continuing my career. So I said, Jesse, let's do it. And so we began in the beginning of April. And it wasn't long after that, things started to slowly unravel. And in the end, it turned out that the person who was running it, the notorious David Hernandez, was doing it under a Ponzi scheme. And he ran out of money and eventually was jailed. And I think he might still be in jail. He had a 16-year sentence. What was interesting about all that, it was he had done it before and nobody knew. But stuff happens. And so we were on for 9 weeks and gone.
Wow, that's short, George. Jesus.
We began, I think, the second week of April. We're off the first week of June. And in the interim, I was traveling with the Blackhawks as they were starting to rise. I was in Calgary, Vancouver, what a great city, Detroit. Then the next year they won the Stanley Cup. So I'm having the time of my life thinking, wow, this is great. And boom, gone. And suddenly in June, we're all looking for work. You know, and in the meantime, the worst thing that happens to me is I eventually discovered that I have a paralyzed vocal cord. I couldn't talk. I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And finally it was diagnosed. I was whispering and went through a whole bunch of procedures at the Voice Institute, the Bastion Voice Institute in Lombard. And eventually I said, listen, you can get your voice back. We have to shoot a gel in your neck. I said, do so. I did. Dave Bennett wanted to hire me in August. He waited. When I did that a week later, I was on the air at WGN, which is why I call him the great Dave Bennett. He is still the voice of Northwestern basketball and football.
I understand, man. You know, much like you almost going to Toronto, Jeff Joniak was going to hire me for Metro Sports. And like a day or two later, Ron is like, all right, listen, come, you know, when we expand the hours at the Score and we're springtime, because we were a daytime only station, as you well know, we're going to need more people. Would you like to join? So I thanked Jeff, but I took this job. And to this day, I mean, it's like, thank you, Jeff, for being willing, even though I didn't get the job with him. And it's like, God, and you know how it is, George, especially when you're trying to break in, you know, hundreds of no's to as opposed to hearing a yes. And Jeff was the first yes. So I'll never forget that. But Gleason was great to me. I always Tom Scher, because, you know, Gleason, Tom Scher, and McNeil were kind of the guys that were picking the producers in that first wave of the Score. And I had a yes from Dan, a maybe from Ron, and a no from Scher because he didn't think I knew enough sports, which I will cop to. I mean, I was really what I came in to do was what I ended up doing, and that is, you know, I mean, I was inspired by guys like at WXRT, the Usual Suspects. Do you remember those guys?
Yes,
Second City
do.
comedians.
Yeah. Right.
And I'm like, you know, hey, let's play radio. I mean, this is our opportunity to play radio. That was my strength. Tom didn't see that right away. He was asking me, you know, who hit the most runs batted in after Hack Wilson.
It
you
was
know,
different. It was different for him, but you wound up doing some shtick that was very, very, very funny. I know.
Thanks,
loved it, and it was part of the whole game there. It wasn't just sports; it was sports and entertainment. You would know that by virtue of Mike in the first place, and Terry Bors and Dan and all those people were more than just sports talk radio hosts. They were entertainers. And, you know, we're the first radio station to do that. So here I am, and, you know, this guy's picking on me, and this guy's picking on me, especially when Jiggets did it. Boy, did I give him back. I gave it back to him and then some. But you know what? It was a wonderful experience. It's part of life. It's part of what you go through without knowing it. I picked listen, there were paths I took that I never thought I would take. Sports phone, that's one. But freelancing in a business that was thriving then with radio networks, I did that for 13 years. I was my own boss. So imagine I'm my own boss from age 25 to 39. And in the interim, I'm out chasing pretty girls and having a good time, until I met Betsy and I stopped chasing pretty girls. I found one.
George, I'm so glad you broke into Harry Carey because you cracked the code, and all of us are doing those that have worked with you do variations of your Harry Carey imitation, and I will cop to that gladly. And when people in the nerd world are like, "That's a great Harry Carey," and I'm like, I learned from the best, man. Get out of the booth. I remember you would always.
That's true. It's a true story. I don't know what it was. He heard some things, and he was get the hell out of my booth. But listen, I grew up with him. I was one of those nerds that he was such a unique broadcaster. When he was with the St. Louis Cardinals, you would try to tune in KMOX radio, and you could get it, at night fairly clearly. And there was Jack Buck and Harry Carey. And then he winds up with the White Sox. Oh my gosh, Harry Carey's with the White Sox. And he was there for 10 years. And it was very entertaining with him and Jimmy Pearsall. As I was mentioning to somebody today, ironically, you'll never, ever, ever in your life get a duo like that. Because of the way the business is today, you will never get somebody like that where suddenly there's a game going on, and we're watching this game in my living room with Sam Rosen, who is now the voice of the New York Rangers and has been for years. And suddenly there's a lull in the game. If the game's being played in Anaheim, and Harry turns to Jimmy, goes, "Say, Jimmy," and he goes, "Yeah, Harry, did you take your pills tonight?" Well, Jimmy had some issues, and he was taking pills. This is a broadcast, and we're watching this going, this is fun. And they tore the players. Some of the players they tore to shreds. You don't hear that today, but that was then. It's a different game today. It's a different business. So we're looking, and then Harry goes to the Cubs, and suddenly, it's such a change. And Sammy Sosa comes, and there's a ton of people, and Harry becomes bigger than life. And then as I am heading to Arizona for spring training, I know that Harry had fallen ill. He had a heart attack. And I'm getting on the plane. And we had these brick phones. The cell phones back then were these gigantic brick phones in the early days. And Jimmy Pearsall calls me and he said, "He just passed." I said, "I can't do anything about it. We're taking off." And when I get to Arizona, I'm ready for spring training. I have to get up the next morning at like 5:30. I'm not in bed till 2 because I'm feeding all of my clients on the death of Harry. I'll never forget that. But I mean, it's, and I don't know if your audience knows Harry Carey.
Oh, sure they do.
Look him up if you don't.
Sure they do.
Because there's nobody like him, and there'll never be. Even
100%.
It's funny. His grandson Chip, his kid just became one of the voices, I think, of the Oakland A's. It's
wow.
Running in the family. It's amazing, isn't it? 4 generations
100%.
of Careys in sports broadcasting. Pretty good.
Good Lord, yeah, four generations of Careys.
4 generations, yep.
Because Skip, of course, Harry's son did the Brave games, and then we had Chip for a while.
And then Chip, yep, bunch of them, and they were all wonderful. And Chip he's a terrific guy, and his twin sons. I texted him today. I don't know what the other one is doing yet. He's waiting to land, but then there they are, and it's like, it's very cool. It's a very cool thing to have 4 generations in one family being baseball play-by-play announcers.
I can't think of any. I mean, the Alberts certainly have a lot of family members in broadcasting.
There were. The Marv Albert's brothers, Steve and Al, were play-by-play guys. And, of course, Kenny, his son, is one of the most versatile guys in the universe. I mean, he does baseball, football, basketball, and hockey, along with Eddie Olczyk. So, yeah, that's 2 generations. This is
right.
4 generations. It's like, whoa.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And also, man, Marv, I one of the best things about working at the Score was the fact that people like yourself knew a lot of people like Costas and Marv Albert, and really went through the trenches as they did early in their careers. And I know you were the Chicago guy on NBC radio, and Marv was the New York guy. You guys were the local guys. So when the Bulls would play in the Knicks, you would be in his town, or vice versa. Tell me about that.
Marv was the voice of the New York Knicks and the New York Rangers. He was revered, but he was also the voice of the NBA on NBC. So early on, when he would come to town, so this was the late 70s, early 80s, they always had a stat guy, and they'd pay him $25. Back then, that was pretty good money. And I would work with Marv, and he was just such an engaging guy. He's just like no ego, but just wonderful. And which is, I'll tell you the story about how I got him on the podcast. So as time went on, you would see Marv, and he'd be so gracious. And so one day, I think it was 1986, I had him do what was then the answering machine for your phone, okay? And I wrote it up for him, and he did it. And I had it running for years. I still have it. It was just hilarious. So I'm beginning the podcast in January of 2021, but I'm stockpiling some interviews. So, I stockpiled people like Greeny and Michael Wilbon and Bob Costas, and I wanted Marv. So I called him. I said, Marv, I'd love to have you do this podcast. He said, George, I've got to tell you, I just don't do podcasts. I'm so sorry. And I was so crestfallen. I just said, Marv, can I convince you? He said, I really don't do it. A week later, I get a phone call from Marv. He said, George, I just did a podcast with Mike Greenberg and Bob Costas, and since I did theirs, I'm going to do yours. And he did. And he was spectacular. I wish I would have had more time telling stories about Chicago connections. Remember, he did the NBA, and he did 5 of the 6 championships. The one he didn't do, The Last Dance, he had been fired by NBC for a rather tawdry incident with a woman.
Yes.
But then in today's day and age, he never would have gotten his job back. A year later, he did, and he went on and on and on. And we aired his I delayed his podcast till he retired at age 80 in 2021. What a remarkable broadcaster, and in the history in New York, he's the king of the castle there.
I'm really glad that he was able to survive that incident.
Yeah.
North and I went to New York, on HBO's dime when there was a big fight. I want to say it was an Oscar De La Hoya fight at the Garden. And the next day the Bulls were playing there. So we obviously got passes. And we were at shoot-around and watching Tex Winter feed balls to the Bulls as they were on the court. And Marv was there. And, prior to the incident, Marv was, when we'd get him on, you guys would bust each other's balls. It was always so funny. And
we would get it. Yeah, let me interrupt. I remember now because we get him on, and it was the bit, and I would do a Marv impression, and he goes, I think you better go to Plan C or something like that. And he was hilarious. The whole thing was a setup, and he was great. I do remember that. Yeah. Absolutely,
man. And we did. We loved Marv, and we're just like, Marv, if there's a safe space in the world for you to come on, and we're not going to hurt you with talk of the incident, it's us. And he was like, guys, I appreciate it. I just got to lay low for a while. Well, and God bless him. He got through it.
Believe it or not, I was the first one to get him on after that situation. I said, I'm going to be very cautious with you. Will you do it? He did. He came on. We had a brief conversation about it, but that was one of his first appearances on radio. I mean, he was always with David Letterman, and, he did a whole shtick with him.
Oh, yeah.
But I remember people at the station were like, how did you do that? How did you get him to come on? I said, I just have a relationship with him to where I was able to bring him on. In the case of Sarah Kustok, who we mentioned earlier, before we did the interview, I said, can I ask you about the issue, the incident with your mom and dad? Her dad was convicted of murdering her mom. Yeah. Think about that for just a minute. And she said, okay. I said, I'm just going to ask you a question. That's it. And she answered it in 2 minutes. It was very important to ask her that before we did the podcast, because it was a very important response that she gave. So, if you know these people, you know that chick, if you have a relationship with them and it's a good one, you're able to do things that perhaps somebody who doesn't know them can't.
I agree, George. And also, and I'm going to say this, and George, you can comment or not about this particular sportscaster. He's still around, still very well revered, but I think Jim Gray would ask tough questions in the most abrasive way and not get a good response. Would get the "how dare you." I remember in '99 at the Red Sox. It was the All-Star game, and it was at now I'm like blanking because I'm stupid. The ballpark at in Boston.
Oh, Fenway Park, yeah.
Fenway Park. I'm an idiot. This is what's happening, George. I'm starting to slip. But
I just want your viewers and listeners to know that Shaky is an idiot. No, I'm just kidding.
George, you've got full cooperation from me. You crap on me as much as you want. That's fantastic. But he had Pete Rose. It was the all-century team at Fenway. Yeah. The fans voted Rose in. Everyone's like, "Will Selig let Rose be on the field because he's banned from baseball and everything?" Yeah. He was. And Jim Gray's like, "Don't you think you owe these people an apology for the gambling and everything?" And Pete's like, "No, I don't. They're not here. And how dare you ask me?" And as you might remember, we had him on Mike's TV show like a week or so later, which was great. But the great thing was, a couple months later, or no, less than a month later, I'm in Vegas to cover a boxing match. And it's Jim Gray, because he was doing boxing for Showtime, and a bunch of the boxing writers. And I forget who said it, but someone's like, "Hey, Jim, what the hell with Pete Rose at Fenway during the All-Star game?" And he goes, "Well, it was great television." And at that point, it was late enough in the night where the pisher that I am next to these great writers and Jim Gray, and I'm like, no, great television is getting a real answer out of him. I said, all you did was piss him off. And all the boxing writers are like, "You're right. John's right, Jim. That's what happened." And the best was it was a Tyson fight. And in the ring, right after a Tyson knockout, he's like, "So, Mike, tell me about your performance tonight." And Mike Tyson, "Listen, before we get into that was very disrespectful what you did to Pete Rose." And I'm like, my God, the convicted rapist is correcting your behavior. What does that? And I got to say, Jim is in the Boxing Hall of Fame, and he deserves it. But there you go, and that's that's the difference.
Some broadcasters can rub people the wrong way. That happens. That's the nature of the beast. Some can be aggressive. Some can just be abrasive. Some can be egomaniacal. It just depends on your taste. And I'm not just talking about sports broadcasting. It could be anything, podcasting, what have you. Some people, and yet some of those people are the most popular people.
Oh, absolutely, yes. But again, it's getting the good answer. And I mean, that was the way I was taught journalism, was not the "how dare you," but to get a real, be able to couch a tough subject and be able to get a real answer from the person you're talking to.
When I interviewed anybody, whether it was in a scrum with athletes, my goal was to get the desired response. I wanted the desired response. Who's the desired response for? Not me, the public. So I would ask tough questions, but I wouldn't be abrasive. There were times where you would have a little bit of a spat with someone. So be it. You have to stand your ground. I'm not going to be pussyfooting around with questions. But the idea was, I wanted to know. And I felt like when I did that, I knew enough to say I'm representing the people who want to know. This is the question I think people want you to ask. Okay, that's my opinion, but I'd like to think to myself, and here's my small ego, that I knew what I was talking about. And so, you would do those interviews, and sometimes they were fun, sometimes they were, but there was some of them were tough, especially when teams lost and you had to ask some really tough questions to people. Sometimes they would get pissed off. Sometimes they would answer the questions. Most of the time, they answer the questions.
What do you think of the difference? Because I think there is one, but again, I'm saying this is really more of a fan these days than an actual participant. But it seems to me, as the years progressed, the athletes got further and further away from the fans. I mean, we talked about Doug Buffon and some of the guys that when we were younger, even before we got in the business, they needed jobs in the community and really became part of the community. I mean, Buffon, coming from Western Pennsylvania and Louisville, where he went to school and stuff, Doug was a Chicago guy. Norm was a Chicago guy. Norm Van Leer, and all these guys. And now, because of the money, they don't need the off-season jobs and stuff. And while I do think there are great examples, like Chris Bryant or whomever, that Chris Bryant from the Cubs, or am I blanking on the name?
Well, no, he was with the Cubs. Yes.
Yeah, when he was with, certainly was a guy that wanted to be part of the community, and there are better examples of guys.
Well,
Dan
I think Anthony Rizzo is probably the best example.
Anthony Rizzo is likely who I was thinking of.
They don't come along very often like him. His generosity, and particularly with the hospital here, one of the hospitals here in Chicago, in which he would pay visits that were not publicized, cancer patients. He still does that now as a member of the Yankees, which to me made him the face of the Cubs. When they traded him, that was, or I believe they wouldn't do, he was a free agent, they didn't sign him. They lost the face of their franchise. I once said, I don't think he'll ever leave the Cubs because he's that valuable of a human being. And I said it then, I'll say it now. The most important part of Anthony Rizzo's life is coming up after baseball. He's that important of a human being. Really, seriously. I mean, this is just wait until you see what that man is going to do after his baseball career. So, yeah, I mean, but they don't, you're right, in this day and age, they don't live here anymore. This is not their home. I mean, it is Chicago, and unlike tonight where the temperature is 55 degrees and we're having this incredible winter, why would you want to stay here and if you can live anywhere else, or if you happen to be from a southern state or what have you? It's easy if you're living in Texas or California or Arizona or Florida. That's year round. That's a great place. So very seldom, and that's okay. That's fine. Their job is for 6 or 7 months. That job is here to perform. It doesn't matter if they live here, the off season, just perform.
Do you think it's going to be harder to get kids out of school to want to come and play in Chicago because of that ability now with the salaries to live anywhere? Because this is tough. I mean, God, a great guy, and it was so ironic. God, and I'm blanking on every name, George. Who was the longtime Marv Levy? No, not Marv Levy. Buffalo Bills.
Oh,
yeah. So Marv Levy living in one of the few cities that has worse weather than Chicago when he's coaching the Bills, and in the off season he's living here and everything. And it was great when he.
But he's from here. I just discussed him with somebody who showed me a picture of him and Marv's 98, sharp as a cat.
God bless him. That's wonderful, man.
98 years old. No,
funny guy.
Athletes, free agents in certain sports will come here if it's money, right? So if you offer the right money, it's like, Cody Bellinger. If a deal works out, then he's here. The fans loved him. They don't care where he's from. I mean, that's been the Bulls' biggest problem is being able to get a free agent to play for them. But sports is a business. It's a big, big, big business where you have NBA players making $40 or $50 million a year. It's unheard of money when we were young and dumb in this particular game. And when somebody made $1 million or whatever, that was a lot. And when Michael Jordan signed his first contract and became very good and wouldn't break his contract because that's who he was, and suddenly he got 33 and 34 million in consecutive seasons, which was an astonishing amount back in 19 whatever that was, 95, 90, so whenever he got that money, that was an astonishing amount of money. It's a very, very big business. What's provincial? Your teams are provincial. Your fans are provincial. The players, as Harry Carey once said, we're all actors on the stage. You come and you go, just like you and me.
Yeah, no, George. You're absolutely right. And again, and I'm glad you said it earlier. Broadcasting is changing, and thankfully news, information, and sports is still vital, and that's why local sports radio is still vital. But the face of television is certainly changing. Someone was asked, my friend who was wondering if you worked in Toronto asked me today, are any, for instance, Cub games, are they still shown on regular TV or White Sox? And I said only a handful that are on broadcast TV. The rest are on, NBC Sports and Marquee.
Yeah, they're cable. Marquee has that's that, and eventually that's going to become streaming, and you may wind up paying for that. That's very in the near future.
Sure, it is.
But on regular TV, no. WGN had the Cubs for all those years, and they're gone now. They're at Marquee. So, yeah, things have changed. You pay your cable fee now, or whatever streaming fee you pay, and eventually they're all going to be on streaming. People are cutting cables left and right. I haven't done that yet, but that's the world we live in.
I'm with you, George. And in fact, in my world of boxing, HBO got out of the business about 5 or 6 years ago. Showtime wrapped up its coverage at the end of last year. And Amazon is picking up what Showtime was doing, and they're going to be doing it on regular Amazon. Yeah. So, and also I have, I don't know if you have it, DAZN, DAZN, that streamer, sports streamer.
No.
I got it again for boxing. And actually, I ended up dropping it because they not only would have and still do have regular cards on their regular channel, but if it's a big event, it's always pay-per-view, just like before. And it's like, what am I paying my subscription for?
I'm the nerd who watches the tennis channel, which of course is on cable.
Sure.
Because I'm a tennis player, and I enjoy that. But yeah, listen, everything in the world. Look what's happened to some of the franchises in sports today, because they had the situation where one of the companies is going broke, and so these teams some of them were in financial issues where they couldn't sign free agents because they didn't know where their TV deal would come from. I think baseball is covering that for the time being.
Wow,
but that's the nature of a business. It can go broke. So here, I know the Blackhawks and the White Sox are sharing Comcast. That contract ends, I think, at the end of this year. Who knows where they're all going to wind? The Blackhawks could stay where they're at. They can make their own channel. The White Sox could stay where they're at. They better stay where they're at, because they're going nowhere. But and then all the things that you read about with Jerry Reinsdorf, the attempt to get a new stadium here, which is making big news. It's just it's part of my world. I'm not in the world you're in. I'm in my world, and for those people who are watching and listening, it's the world of sports. It's the world of sports broadcasting or podcasting or writing. It's always been my world. It's been my world since I was a child.
I think that's great, and also it is interesting. I of the 4 major sports, I know there's revenue sharing in football, as far as broadcasting and stuff, so they all get an equal slice of those giant NFL television contracts. Baseball doesn't have revenue sharing, does it?
It does. It does for the teams that don't. It's not TV revenue sharing. It's revenue sharing overall. Yeah, some of the teams that don't make as much money, do get some revenue sharing. The NBA it's equal, and the contract that was signed, the television contract, is why those contracts are just, I can't say they're out of whack, because if the money is there and they want to pay them, they do, which is why the top player, even the average player is making 10 million a year. The top players are making 50 million a year. And you're thinking, you know what? You should do a show in Vegas. Oh, wait, forget Vegas. You are the show.
Absolutely, man. No, and if the players are getting that much money, the owners are getting another hundreds of millions more.
Well, yeah,
So
the owners, listen, it costs a lot of money to buy a franchise in this day and age. But if you own one for a while, look, the Ricketts family, Tom Ricketts, bought the Cubs in 2010 for $865 million. It's a lot of money. Right now, they're worth over $4 billion. It's a good investment.
Yeah, not bad, not bad. George, what do you think? You know what bummed me out was the news I think it was last month about Sports Illustrated, and I mean it's been dying by 1,000 small cuts for a long time. And I think back when we were together at the Score, and we'd have guys on like Lester Munson and so many great journalists, and the decades of great journalism that came from Sports Illustrated. As you know, a couple of years ago, they cut loose a lot of their deans of writing and gave them the golden parachutes, and they replaced them with guys who, frankly, in my opinion, would flunk a lot of high school English classes, let alone journalism. And then the news that they were using AI at the end just really got me so angry. So, tell me, your feelings about the demise of Sports Illustrated.
Well, things come and go. This is what we see. Businesses come and go, restaurants come and go, newspapers come and go, magazines come and go. Life magazine was a big magazine. It's gone. Sports Illustrated came about in the mid 50s and was our Bible. You couldn't wait to get that in the mail on a Thursday and read it from cover to cover. It was the only sports magazine worthwhile. And time, mismanagement, a new business model, the internet, eventually caused its demise. Some of the very great writers, Curry Kirkpatrick, Frank DeFord, I mean, there's millions. I can't even remember them
Pat
now.
Putnam and, God, again, Rick Riley.
That's part of what we grew up with, but that's the same thing as newspapers. That when we were around early, we had newspapers that were, we had the Daily News, the Chicago American, the Tribune, and the Sun-Times.
Yep.
And the Daily Herald, which seemingly it's there. I don't know if it's on life support, but yeah.
No, I hear you, man. Or you'd ride home on the L at night, and everybody had the afternoon edition, and where everybody was buried in the newspaper and stuff. And of course now they're sitting there, seeing things on their phone. But yeah, I just kind of figured that some brands have been able to shift to the digital world. And I think maybe in the other hands that SI could have continued, because there is a desire for quality sports journalism still. George, I don't subscribe to The Athletic. Do you? And if so, and it seems like The Athletic is certainly trying to be that national journalism voice.
Well, it is. It's local here, but you do get some of the national writers. And yes, so far it's doing well. It obviously was bought by the New York Times. So you can see, if you read the New York Times, near the bottom, when I read it online, you will see some articles from The Athletic. And yes, they have some quality writers who came over from other newspapers here in Chicago. They were able to get them. And yet they've had some issues, financial issues, where they've lopped off a couple of people or decided they didn't want to use them for certain coverages. But yeah, it's a good paper. The sports writers here in Chicago in the newspapers are still good. There's still some very good columnists. Paul Sullivan, who's in the book. He's a longtime baseball writer, and I guess he's been around for over 40 years. Rick Morrissey, who has it's a great gift for words, tremendous writer. He's fun to read. And hey, you can read that book that you just showed on the screen. That's my effort in the world of literature. You're right; it's not a novel, but tell me a story I don't know. By the way, the best place to purchase it is on Amazon. Easy to get, and like I said, it's not a hardcover, but it's not a paperback. It's in between. They call it a larger paperback, and it's fun reading. You get to read little biographies and stories from 50 different, very, very unique individuals. Locally, Cheryl Ray Stout, she's one of the last of the dying breed of the press boxes here in Chicago, and she's been around for 40 years, well known for being a producer for Chet Kopic many, many years ago. But there are a lot of very unique personalities in the book. So, like I said, if you're a sports fan at all, you should buy it. But if you're not, and you know somebody who is, it is a wonderful gift. And boy, am I trying to sell this book or what?
No, but George, the good news is it is, again, you know what you're doing. And I'm glad the book exists. I hope that you will, again, with all these more people that you've interviewed that aren't in the book, that you could likely do another. Were there, and you don't have to name names, were there any people that you interviewed that are like, it's okay that we did the podcast. Don't transcribe it.
While I do this, and I don't mean to do this. What did I do?
No problem.
Let's see. Okay, we got to plug in here because we're running out of power with my phone.
Oh, I'm sorry, brother. Yeah, I won't keep you much longer, but I.
Okay,
all right.
That's fine. Repeat your question about. No, you mean was there anybody that wasn't very good or something?
No. That anyone was worried about the interviews being transcribed rather than just being podcasts.
No, nobody knew that I was going to write a book. And again, this is not just transcription of the interviews. This is me writing around certain quotes that are in there. Some of these vignettes, they run between 1,300 and 1,700 words. And there may be 1, 2, or 3 stories. And there are, look, everybody's a storyteller. Some are just terrific. Steve Stone, who's still the analyst for the White Sox, a great storyteller. Eddie Olczyk is fabulous. The best of the lot is Dave Wanstead, the former coach of the Bears, who's still an analyst for WSCR, The Score, and NBC Sports. I'm telling you, when he came out of the womb, he was telling stories about the Dallas Cowboys. The man is a gifted storyteller. Some people just can do that. We all know people who are amazing in telling stories. Well, most of these people are good at it because if you give them time, and a lot of people were broadcasters here, some were not, they have the gift of gab, and they're terrific. Dave Revson, who is the first face of the Big Ten Network, tells a great story about golf. And I'm not going to give this away, but he was on vacation, him and his wife, young child, 20 years ago. He wanted to play golf. So he found a foursome. And he wound up with his partner, one of the most notorious people of the 20th century. I'll let you figure that one out.
Got to buy the book, man. Absolutely. Yep. Before we wrap up, George, another development, I think, as journalism has shifted away from traditional outlets, Substack has been a big savior for a lot of columnists who found themselves on the beach and now are doing, their own weekly blogs and things.
That's
and
good.
I think, do you subscribe to any Substacks out there?
I don't. I've seen some of it. It's good. The more people who are capable and who can get work in our industry, whether it's broadcast or writing, that's important. That's good. The internet has spawned so many different options to do. CHGO, for example,
yes,
the last couple of years has come on the scene with some very interesting people and some very interesting topics. We're talking about 5 different teams here in the city of Chicago. So these are all new. They're growing. I mean,
have you been on their platform, George?
I've been a guest on their platform.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
very different. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's a very different kind of format, which is good because what we all know is important is creativity. There's always going to be creativity in this world, albeit I am worried about AI, but that's another story for another day.
I
But
hear you.
creativity is what we're all in a business where we want to be creative. And look at you. You've been doing this now for a number of years. It's called being creative.
Well, again, I did it because I didn't want when the microphone was taken away from me at Sporting News Radio, and I was kind of relegated to behind the scenes. I needed an outlet, and that's why. I mean, and as you say, come May, it'll be 19 years that I've been doing.
Wow.
Yeah, well,
Same thing happened to me at WBBM. The mic was taken away from me in July of 2020, and I had to learn how to be a podcaster. I had to learn a lot of stuff about this particular part of this industry, and eventually, we aired our first podcast in January of 2021, and it was pretty successful. And the idea was to monetize it, which we did. And I had a lot of fun. I hated chasing people after a while, but I interviewed a lot of very, very interesting people. And that's why I think you'll enjoy the 50 that we have in the book.
absolutely, man. Again, the book is called Tell Me a Story I Don't Know, Conversations with Chicago Sports Legends. The author, George Ofman, and a hell of a broadcaster and a hell of a podcaster. You got to get back to it, George. I'm telling you, there's more stories to be heard, and you can have repeat guests on. I know that Costas and Albert and Jason, Benetti and everything. God, it's heartbreaking that the Sox didn't keep him. He's at Detroit now. Is he in Detroit?
He's with the Tigers, and obviously he's doing so many other things for Fox Sports.
Sure. Yes.
He's an extraordinary story because he suffers from cerebral palsy, but he has taken that to another level. He is one of the most intelligent, emotional, and important people that I have ever interviewed. When I talk about a man whose heart is on his sleeve, his heart is entire body. Seriously, he's an incredibly talented and funny person. That's part of our industry here in Chicago. And I mean, Jason's left. Adam Amin is another one who's young, who's near the top of his profession. So Chicago's been very lucky to have two of one of the new breed. Unfortunately, Jason is gone, and Adam is still here working beautifully with Stacey King. So, like I said before, Harry Carey said it, we're the actors on the stage, and hopefully we can be on the stage for a long time.
And this collection of stories really represents many decades of Chicago sports.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the other great thing, too, that it isn't just a remember when book, because you do have people like Adam and Jason and,
they're younger.
Cassidy, Sarah.
Yes, right. They're the ones that are in their 30s and early 40s, and then we had Brent Musburger, who's 84. He's as lucid as anybody I've ever interviewed. So, yeah, they've created their own paths already. Some of these people who haven't reached 40 have already created an incredible path. But it's not just that path; it's the stories that they tell. I'll be very brief. Adam Amin. We share a few things in common. We're the babies of the family, and we're the only ones born in the United States. His family was born, I believe it was Pakistan, and it's an incredible story that he tells about that. And look what happened to that man's career. I mean, he is number 2 or 3 at Fox in their football coverage. He's terrific with the Bulls. He's very energetic. And good for him and good for the city of Chicago that they have him.
Well, good for you getting his stories, George, because truly it's a great collection, and I'm happy to help you pump the product and get the word out there. Everybody go to Amazon, and look for George Ofman with one F. Tell a story I don't know. Tell me a story I don't know. And well done. And truly, George, I'm really happy for you. I'm sorry that you're not with me in the podcasting brethren anymore. But the good news is people can go and listen to these great interviews as well still and find them on all your podcast platforms. Wherever you look, you will find it if you put in the title. And, it's outstanding. I'm seeing here. Oh, hey, Sandy Max, who we worked with for years out of Milwaukee, saying hello. So that's great. Yeah, man. No, and Sox Nerd, who you might know from Twitter and X and stuff, and is a massive fan of yours. My buddy David Marin loves your stuff.
He's been very supportive. I am very appreciative of David. Anytime I was pushing the book, he was pushing it as well. So I really appreciate that.
No, and again, isn't that great, George? I mean, that's the thing. I think you discover new fans that you didn't know were listening or whatever, and here they are, and it's. Believe me, I get that same kind of wonderful feeling when I encounter fans who are like, oh, I've been listening to you for years. It's like, oh, my God, that's awesome. Or, like you said, when I was at BBM doing traffic, and especially when I do them on the Bears post game, we always had a traffic tip line. And, I mean, I hadn't been on the score for 20 years. And they're like, Shaky, is that you? Or 15 years. And I'm like, yes, it is. And they're like, oh, my God, where have you been?
Yeah.
Like, behind the scenes. But thankfully, I came back. George, this was great. I really appreciate it. I hope that you write another book, and it'll give me an excuse to have you back. For real. I mean, well, regardless, we could sit on the porch and just reminisce with score stories and stuff. I'm so glad you mentioned because listen, we love Dan Jiggets, but it really was like you're not the tallest man in the world. So diminutive George against this former Bear linesman who is just a giant, and, get to the update on time. Don't tell me how to do my show. And it was fantastic just being on the sidelines, watching you guys go at it.
Everything can be overblown, including Jiggets. Had to get a kick in there somehow, right?
Come on, man. Absolutely. Absolutely. This was great, George. I really appreciate you coming on tonight.
Thank you, Shaky. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Tomorrow I'm going to have a double feature. I'm going to talk to my buddy Brian Volkweiss, who's introducing a new toy line that he's been working on for years. Brian produced the toys that made us and the movies that made us for Netflix. He's a big comedy producer for Comedy Dynamics. But he and the people at Oni Press have a new line of comics that they're going to be putting out. And then my dear friend, great name, Pornsack Pishat Show will be joining me later on Thursday night to talk about a brand new book from him. Pornsack won the Eisner for his excellent book, The Good Asian, which was a look at a Chinese detective in 1930 San Francisco. So it's going to be great to talk to him as well. All that's coming up on Word Balloon tomorrow night. I hope you enjoyed today's broadcast. Until next time, stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.